Hello, everyone. Welcome to another great episode of Royal Black and Elite. I'm Lady TrenettWilson. I'm your lecturer and social historian, and I am so thankful that you're here to join me today for a wonderful lecture and a very interesting lecture. As you know, I always like to find hidden and great stories, and I thought this one was very interesting because there is some question if the president of the Confederate States of America, Jefferson Davis, may have been married to a mixed race woman. Join me for today's lecture of Varina and Banks Davis. Now, this is his wife, and there is some question as to her heritage as far as if she was mixed race. Now, there are some reports that have come out during that era that said that she was mulatto looking or a native looking. So she definitely had olive skin. Now, some say it was because of her Dutch ancestry. But when you look at the Dutch, they have blonde hair. They do not have dark hair, dark eyes, big lips, and just the look of a mixed race person. Now, some believe she was Creole because during the time where she was born, the Creole population was vast there. Varina was born in Natchez, Mississippi on May 26th, 1826. In Mississippi, where this is, they had a big Creole population. So look how fair skinned Creole people are. They could easily pass for white, Native American, and even Spanish. Now, Verena came from the bluest of blood. In fact, her grandfather, Richard, was the governor of New Jersey several times. So she came from a very wealthy family. Her father was William B. Howe, and he was a veteran. And her mother was Margaret Kemp. She was the daughter of a plantation owner. So slavery had already been deeply ensconced in her family. She knew about it. And I wonder how she felt looking differently from everyone else, seeing Black people enslaved. But because I believe if she is mixed race, which, visually she is, it probably was some generations before. So if the family believed in these slaves, then as we know from the stories that we have read and learned about, having slaves as mistresses was a big thing back then. So there's no doubt the family practiced and believed in slavery, so much so that when Margaret married William, Margaret's father gave them 60 slaves and 2,000 acres in Mississippi. But William was not a businessman. He wasn't a farmer. In fact, he really wasn't good at making money at all. And it ended up that their family went bankrupt. And as a result, their slaves were seized and they even was going to try to seize their land. But William's family stepped in, Margaret's family stepped in and pretty much financed their life. They even lived in a house, in this house here. She grew up in this house that was paid for by her family members. And they even sent her to a prestigious school, Madame Deborah Gallard's French School. It was a prestigious academy for girls. So her family, outside her mom and dad, had enough money to keep her in school and in a very, high social class. Now she met a lady named Sarah Ann Ellis. Her name would later be Dorsey. She plays a very pivotal role in her life later on. So after completing her studies, she moved back home when she was about 17 years old. And it was expected at that age that she would become a wife. And that is, listen, don't comment down at the bottom about what women should have been doing and it wasn't she shouldn't have been going to school to be a wife. This is how the time was then. It was understood that you did get an education, but your goal was to marry and have a family. And as a wife of 35 years at this point and the mother of many children and grandchildren, I also have a degree and I raised my kids, and then I went back and got the continued education and training that I needed to be a social historian and etiquette consultant. And so, in my second half of my life, I'm doing what I love to do. But I'm also reaping the benefits of having a family. So this is how they did it then, and this is how Verena wanted to do it. So she was 17 years old, but when she met her future husband, he was 35. And that's also how it was done back then. Young girls married older men. Now, when she met him, she didn't even like him. She said she actually wrote her mother and said, "This man, he looks old." And unfortunately, her financial situation didn't get better because he was broke too. So when they were married, they married at her mother's house on February the 26th, 1845. And none of his family showed up to the wedding. And for their honeymoon, they went to see his mother. And now check this out. He was married before her, and they were only married like 3 months, and she unfortunately passed away. So on Verena and his honeymoon, they went to her grave, his wife who had passed away's grave. So that was her honeymoon. So this is the setting that she stepped into this marriage. And everything was really different about the two. One, he was a Democrat and she was a Whig. And not only that, he was a very dominant man, so he didn't ask her permission to do anything. So as soon as they moved into their home, he also moved his broke sister in. The article that I read called her penniless, his penniless sister and her 7 children, without even asking her permission. So, and they had long bouts of separation because he was traveling all the time. So she was left there with his brother, who was very domineering over her, and she didn't like it. Things changed in 1846, though, when Davis was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, and they moved to D.C. She absolutely loved it. Now, this was before the Civil War, and she was a socialite. And let me tell you, they were Democrats were very racist back then. So they were fighting for keeping slavery. She and her husband believed in slavery. Like I said, they had slaves. And so she believed in slaves, but she didn't feel like they should be humanely treated inhumanely. So that was her stance on it. Now, when the Civil War broke out, it became very abundantly clear how she felt. She really spoke against the Civil War many times in the newspaper, and she even said that they were going to lose. She wrote a letter to her husband and told him that the South was going to lose and that the North was going to win. And not because, again, that she didn't believe in slavery, but she believed that people should be treated humanely. And so she really aligned herself with Northern and Southern sympathies. That's why she called herself a half breed. Or at least that's what they report. I think she called herself a half breed because she knew she was mixed race. In fact, when she would go on the stomp with her husband, when he would go and do campaign speeches, there was one colonel who was in the Confederate Army. His name was James Wilborn, and he kept diaries. And in one of his diaries, they said when she showed up with Jefferson Davis, they all said she was mulatto. She was dark skinned, and so there is something called whitewashing of pictures back in the day. So even someone who never met the woman before said she was clearly a mulatto woman. So she moved. She had to go to Washington, D.C., but she actually loved it. She was able to hook back up with her friends. By then, she had kids. They had 6 children, and she loved her life. But when the Civil War broke out, and he was elected to president of the Confederate Union, she had to separate herself and go with him. Now, mind you, she didn't have no money. She had 6 children, and so this was her husband, and she was the first lady of the Confederate. Today, that just sounds for us like, what are you thinking, ma'am? You black? You doing this? But back then, this was status for her to be the wife of a president. And they believed in slavery. So the institution itself, she didn't have any problem with. So they took up arms and they moved to Richmond, and they began to lead as the first lady and president of the Confederacy. Well, that didn't last long. He was sworn in February 1861, and by 1865, Ulysses S. Grant neared Richmond. So Jefferson sent his wife, Varina, to Florida, and on her way to England, and he went to Texas. He was thinking he could re-establish everything in Texas, not in my state. Uh, he thought he could reestablish the Confederacy and get everything going again, which it didn't work. Now, every now and then they would come back together to see each other because she was still in Florida. Well, they got caught and they were on a road in Georgia, and it was May 1865. And when they got caught, she tried to throw her shawl over his head so they wouldn't catch him, but they caught him anyway. That's why rumor has it that when he got caught, he was dressed like a woman, but that wasn't the case. She had threw his shawl over the head trying to get away. Trying to get away from the fact that they wanted to keep slavery in the United States. And the war had been won, the battle was over. They got caught in 1867 and they put him in jail, but do you know they didn't make him stay? He wasn't there. They let him go and never tried him again or anything for sedition or anything. So they moved to England. That didn't last long. He was not very good with money and he was not a businessman. So they had to move back to the United States. And remember that friend I mentioned earlier, Sarah? Well, in the time that all these years had passed by, she had become a wealthy woman. And because they did not have any money, she let them live in her house in Mississippi, in coastal Mississippi. And they moved in 1877, and that was her home for many years. But the thing about it is, it was kind of like out in the open. People knew where they lived and who they were. So people would just stop by their house without permission, asking to take pictures and asking to come in. So that kind of got old. So after Jefferson Davis passed away, and she had lost all but two of her daughters. Jefferson passed away in 1889 of pneumonia. So she moved to New York with her daughter Winnie, and that was just so sad because her daughter was very a writer. She was moving up in the world, and she also passed away. And so that was very depressing for her. They both became writers. In fact, that's what Verna did in her end of her life. She became a writer, and she passed away at a hotel on Central Park on October the 16th, 1906. She was 80 years old. So she outlived most of her children. She outlived her husband, and she was the first, I say, mixed race woman who was married to a president. Now, she feels she was on the right side of history because she always spoke against the war, but I just think being married to Davis was just wrong from the beginning, especially if there was any question about her background and race. So look at this picture. Was she mixed? I think she looks like a native woman even here in her old age. So I do believe she was mixed with something. You all let me know what you think down in the comments. With that, that brings our lecture to an end. I want to thank you all for joining me for another great episode of Royal Black and Elite. I want to thank you also for subscribing. Now, this lecture is for entertainment and educational purposes only, and my sources were Papers of Jefferson, the Civil War Talk, the Britannica, and Wikipedia. Now, if you like what you're learning, check out the next video. I think you're going to find it very interesting. Thank you for watching.